Hey there, so you're American, huh? Well, let me tell you something surprising. While the U.S. is one of the most popular and influential countries in the world, not every place in the world is eager to welcome U.S. citizens. Believe it or not, there are countries where Americans might get a cold shoulder instead of the usual red carpet. It's not always sunshine and rainbows everywhere, and some countries have very specific reasons for making American tourists feel unwelcome. Whether it's due to political tensions, past conflicts, or ongoing issues, some nations are definitely not keen on having Americans around. So, let's take a deep dive into the 10 countries where Americans are least likely to get a warm reception. But before we start, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and help us hit 5,000 likes. Let's get started. 10. Myanmar. Let's begin with Myanmar, a country in Southeast Asia that has a population of around 55 million people. Myanmar used to be a hidden gem for travelers, offering stunning natural landscapes and a rich cultural heritage. However, things took a dramatic turn in February 2021 when a military coup ousted the elected government, leading to widespread political instability and civil unrest. Since then, the situation has spiraled, with ongoing armed conflict and protests against the military regime. For Americans, visiting Myanmar is not just a matter of deciding where to stay or what sights to see. The visa process is complex and time-consuming, taking a minimum of 3 working days to process. But even if you get through the bureaucratic maze, the situation on the ground is far from welcoming. The U.S. government has issued a strong travel advisory, advising against travel due to safety concerns like arbitrary enforcement of local laws and limited healthcare resources. Imagine arriving in a country where you're told not to travel, and the tension in the air is palpable. Additionally, the U.S. sanctions on Myanmar further complicate things, and Americans are often viewed as unwelcome guests due to the political friction. 9. Yemen. Next up is Yemen, a country with a population of around 30 million. Yemen has been in the midst of an incredibly devastating conflict since 2015, involving various factions, including a Saudi-led coalition and Houthi rebels. This conflict has led to a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented scale, with widespread violence, terrorism, and civil unrest. For Americans thinking about visiting, Yemen is a place that should be on your avoid list. The U.S. State Department has a do-not-travel advisory in place due to the high risk of kidnapping, armed conflict, and terrorism. The visa process is as tough as it gets, and even if you somehow get approved, the hostility towards Americans, especially due to the country's perception of U.S. involvement in the conflict, makes Yemen a challenging destination. In addition, Yemen's infrastructure has been severely compromised, with limited medical services and a crumbling economy making the country an especially dangerous place to visit for U.S. citizens. 8. Somalia. Let's move on to Somalia, a country in the Horn of Africa with a population of around 15 million people. Somalia has long been plagued by political instability, armed conflict, and terrorism. The Al-Shabaab insurgency, an Islamist militant group, has been active in the region, and the U.S. has been involved in military operations to combat this threat. In 2022, the U.S. redeployed troops to assist in these efforts, which has only increased the perception of Americans as hostile figures in Somalia. Visiting Somalia as an American isn't just difficult, it's downright dangerous. The visa process is notoriously complicated, and the security risks are immense. For Americans, the dangers include kidnapping, terrorist attacks, and being caught in the crossfire of ongoing clashes. Somalia is also facing a humanitarian crisis, with millions of people displaced due to conflict and severe food shortages. The combination of these factors makes Somalia a country that is actively unwelcoming to U.S. travelers. 7. Venezuela. Venezuela is another country where Americans face significant challenges. With a population of over 28 million people, Venezuela has been in a state of economic collapse for years. Hyperinflation, widespread poverty, and a government that's been locked in conflict with the U.S. make it a difficult destination for American tourists. In fact, the relationship between the U.S. and Venezuela has been strained for decades, with economic sanctions, political tensions, and mistrust from both sides. For U.S. citizens, getting a visa to Venezuela is a tedious process that involves dealing with a skeptical and sometimes hostile government system. The situation has only worsened in recent years, with 7.7 million people fleeing the country due to the dire conditions. If you do manage to make it in, you'll find high costs of living, security concerns, and a general sense of tension that makes it a challenging place for Americans to visit. While some Americans still reside in Venezuela, particularly in the capital city of Caracas, they often feel like unwelcome guests in a country torn apart by political instability and economic hardship. 6. Libya. Libya, a country of about 7 million people, has had a roller coaster relationship with the U.S. for decades. Following the 2011 revolution that ousted Muammar Gaddafi, the country has been in a constant state of chaos, with various factions battling for control. The U.S. State Department has issued a Do Not Travel advisory due to the dangers of terrorism, kidnapping, and civil unrest. Libya's complex political environment, particularly the attack on the U.S. mission in Benghazi in 2012, has left deep scars in the relationship between the two countries. Getting a visa for Americans is a major hurdle, and even if you get through the bureaucracy, you still face significant risks on the ground. Additionally, the Libyan government doesn't allow entry to passports bearing Israeli stamps, making things even more complicated for travelers. If you're thinking about visiting Libya, the combination of violence, political instability, and security threats should give you serious pause. 5. Syria. Syria, a country known for its rich cultural history, is unfortunately better known for its ongoing civil war that has displaced millions of people. With a population of around 18 million, Syria's ongoing conflict has drawn international attention, especially given the complex political landscape involving sanctions, foreign military intervention, and terrorism. For Americans, Syria is about as unwelcoming as it gets. The U.S. government has placed Syria under a Level 4 travel advisory, which is essentially a warning to stay far away. The visa process is a logistical nightmare, with serious restrictions on Americans wanting to visit. Additionally, the situation on the ground is dangerous, as hostilities between different factions can escalate at any moment. The U.S. military's involvement in Syria has made the country's attitude toward Americans even more hostile. Visitors are often viewed with suspicion, and the ongoing conflict means that safety is never guaranteed. 4. Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been at the center of global conflicts for decades, particularly due to the U.S. invasion in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks. With a population of around 38 million people, Afghanistan has been dealing with terrorism, political instability, and armed conflict ever since. Although the U.S. officially withdrew in 2021, terrorist groups and insurgent forces still operate in many parts of the country. For Americans, Afghanistan is a no-go zone. The U.S. State Department has consistently warned Americans not to travel to Afghanistan, citing high risks of kidnapping, terrorism, and wrongful detention. Even if you manage to secure a visa, the security situation is volatile, and the chances of being caught in a terrorist attack or encountering serious violence are high. The bureaucracy involved in the visa process is another challenge, and the country's tense relations with the U.S. make it a place where Americans are rarely welcomed. 3. Iraq. Iraq has had a tumultuous relationship with the United States ever since the 2003 U.S.-led invasion, which resulted in the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. The country, with a population of about 40 million, has struggled with ongoing political instability, the rise of terrorist groups like ISIS, and armed militia groups that make security a major concern. For Americans, the visa process to Iraq is complex, and even once you get the green light, security concerns loom large. The country is still in the grips of armed conflict, with various factions and terrorist organizations vying for control. While Iraq does allow Americans to get visas on arrival at certain airports, the overall situation makes it an unwelcoming destination. American travelers are often viewed with suspicion and could be at risk of violent attacks. Iraq is not a place to visit lightly, especially with such a dangerous security environment. 2. Iran. Next, we have Iran, a country with a rich history and a population of over 83 million. However, the relationship between the United States and Iran has been tense for decades, particularly after the 1979 Iran hostage crisis. Since then, relations have remained fraught, and the U.S. has imposed economic sanctions and political pressure on the Iranian government. For Americans, getting a visa to Iran is a challenging process, requiring months of paperwork and bureaucracy. Additionally, credit and debit cards don't work in Iran, and travelers must rely on cash. The Iranian government has a history of detaining Americans on charges that many view as politically motivated, and the risks are high. Americans are viewed with suspicion, and the political environment makes it difficult for U.S. citizens to feel comfortable or welcome. Cultural differences and the highly controlled nature of the country add to the challenges. 1. North Korea. Finally, we have North Korea, perhaps the most notorious country in the world for American travelers. Officially known as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, North Korea has been under authoritarian rule since its establishment, and the country is known for its strict control over its population and foreign visitors alike. For Americans, visiting North Korea is an impossible feat due to strict restrictions. The U.S. government has issued a travel ban on American citizens visiting the country, with a few exceptions. Even before the ban, North Korea was an incredibly unwelcoming place for Americans. The regime strictly controls every aspect of your visit, from where you go to what you can take photos of. American travelers are not free to explore the country at will, and the government's tight surveillance makes it clear that tourism is highly regulated. Travelers are often detained for arbitrary reasons, and any perceived disrespect towards the North Korean leadership can lead to severe consequences. Simply put, North Korea is a country where Americans are not only unwelcome but where even the smallest mistakes can have dire repercussions. These are the 10 countries where Americans are the least welcome. While some of these places offer rich history, culture, and landscapes, the political and security issues make them challenging, and even dangerous, destinations for U.S. citizens. If you're thinking of traveling, make sure to research thoroughly, respect local customs, and always check the travel advisories. Want to know more about the most dangerous cities in Europe? Check out our next video here, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos on travel and global insights. Stay safe and see you on the next adventure.